Commander Nurse Calder had learned long ago that the fastest way to survive a room full of men who outranked her was to make herself small, quiet, and forgettable. She kept her scrubs pressed, her ponytail tight, and her opinions to herself. At Naval Medical Center's diplomatic wing, she was simply Nurse Calder, the woman who changed dressings, checked vitals, and disappeared into the background while admirals and foreign dignitaries postured over conference tables. Nobody in that building knew that 6 years earlier, she had crawled through the mountains of a country whose name still couldn't appear in unclassified reports, translating intercepted radio traffic in real time while carrying a wounded teammate on her back. Nobody knew she'd once talked a hostile checkpoint guard into standing down using nothing but his own dialect and a steady voice. That woman didn't exist here. Here she was just the nurse who kept her head down. The trouble started when a coalition delegation arrived unannounced. 2 ministers from a Gulf state, their translator delayed at customs, and a medical incident that couldn't wait. One of the ministers had collapsed in the hallway outside the briefing room, clutching his chest, words tumbling out in rapid, panicked Arabic laced with a regional dialect the base's contracted linguist didn't speak. Doctors surrounded him, shouting for vitals, but no one could understand what he was trying to tell them about his medication allergies, his prior cardiac history, the blood thinner he'd taken that morning. Admiral Holt Bregman, the base's blustering, image-obsessed commanding officer, stormed into the room just as the chaos peaked, more concerned with the potential diplomatic embarrassment than the man dying on the floor. His eyes swept the room and landed on Calder, the only person crouched calmly beside the patient, monitoring his pulse. "You, nurse." Bregman's voice cracked like a whip, dripping with the kind of condescension he reserved for anyone he considered beneath his notice. "You're hovering. Make yourself useful. Go find someone who can actually translate this, before I have to explain to Washington why we let a foreign minister die because nobody in this building speaks anything but English." A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the junior officers behind him, the kind of laughter people give when they want the boss to know they're on his side. Calder didn't laugh. She didn't flinch either. She simply looked up, met the minister's terrified eyes, and switched fluidly into his dialect, asking him in low, precise tones about his medications, his allergies, the timeline of his symptoms. The room went silent. Bregman's mouth was still open mid-sentence, the mocking words dying somewhere in his throat. The minister's shoulders sagged with relief at finally being understood. He answered rapidly, and Calder translated for the doctors without missing a beat: dosages, timing, a family history of arrhythmia. A warning about a drug interaction that would have been catastrophic if administered. The cardiac team pivoted their treatment plan in seconds, guided by information that would have taken precious, possibly fatal minutes to untangle through a phone-based interpreter service. Bregman stood frozen, his earlier smirk replaced by something between confusion and dawning unease. "Where did you?" he started, but Calder was already moving, switching to a second dialect to calm the minister's aide, who had rushed in speaking an entirely different language from a neighboring region. Then a third language when the delegation's junior attaché arrived, flustered and asking questions in rapid French. Then a fourth when a base translator finally showed up and Calder smoothly briefed her in accented, fluent Portuguese out of habit before catching herself and switching back to English. The doctors worked with new confidence, the patient stabilized, and the room slowly exhaled. But the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The officers who had laughed moments earlier now stood in uncomfortable silence, watching the quiet nurse they'd overlooked for months move between 5 distinct languages like she was flipping through channels on a television. Bregman, to his credit or perhaps his downfall, wasn't ready to let it go. "Since when?" he said, his voice lower now, trying to reclaim some authority. "Does a floor nurse speak 5 languages?" Calder finished checking the patient's foreline before answering, her tone level almost bored. 8 actually, Admiral. 5 was just what today required." The words landed like a drop tray in a silent cafeteria. Somewhere behind him, one of the younger doctors actually gasped. What Bregman didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Calder's linguistic fluency hadn't come from a classroom or a study abroad semester. It had come from 3 deployments with a special operations medical unit so classified that her own personnel file listed her prior service only as administrative support, overseas. She had learned Pashto from village elders while treating their children, learned Arabic dialects from wounded interpreters she'd kept alive during firefights, picked up French and Portuguese during joint operations with Allied forces whose own medics didn't speak English. Every language was a scar with a story behind it, and every story was locked behind a classification level. Bregman would need 3 signatures, and a security clearance he didn't possess to even glimpse. He had mocked her in front of 40 people, certain he was humiliating an overqualified hospital employee. Instead, he had just cracked open a door into a past he had no idea existed. And behind that door was a woman far more dangerous, and far more decorated, than anyone in that room could imagine. If you're already leaning forward wondering just how deep this rabbit hole goes, hit subscribe now because Chapter 2 is where Admiral Bregman finds out exactly who he's been talking down to. And it is not a mistake he'll get to make twice. The story might have ended there, filed away as an awkward moment forgotten by the next duty shift, if Bregman had simply let it go. But men like him rarely do. Wounded pride has a way of curdling into obsession. And by the following morning, the Admiral had pulled Calder's personnel file himself, expecting to find some plausible explanation. A childhood spent overseas, immigrant parents, a linguistics degree buried somewhere in her transcripts. What he found instead was a file so heavily redacted it looked more like abstract art than a service record. Black bars swallowed entire sections. Deployment locations were listed only as CENTCOM AR, classified. Her commendations section, usually a source of pride for any long-serving officer, was reduced to a single cryptic line. Awards and decorations available upon verified need-to-know clearance. Bregman had commanded this base for 2 years, and had never once seen a file like it belonging to someone with the rank of a mere lieutenant commander in the nursing corps. Frustrated and increasingly uneasy, he did what insecure men in positions of power often do. He tried to go over her head, placing a call to the regional medical command to clarify a personnel matter. The call did not go the way he expected. Within 20 minutes, his phone rang back, and the voice on the other end belonged to a 2-star general he'd only ever spoken to twice in his career, both times with considerable deference. The general's tone was clipped, almost irritated, as if Bregman had disturbed something far more important than he realized. "Admiral, I'm going to ask you professionally to close that file and never open it again," the general said. "Lieutenant Commander Calder's operational history is compartmented above your clearance, and quite frankly, above mine on a good day. If she chooses to tell you anything about her service, that will be her decision, not an order I'm going to give her. Are we clear?" Bregman, stunned into silence, managed only a weak, "Yes, sir," before the line went dead. For the first time in years, the Admiral felt something unfamiliar creeping up his spine. The sensation of being very small in a room he thought he owned. Word of the incident, as these things do on a military base, spread with astonishing speed. By the time the coalition delegation returned 3 days later for a follow-up meeting regarding the minister's recovery and a proposed joint humanitarian medical mission, half the base had heard some version of the story. Nurse Calder speaks 5 languages, Nurse Calder speaks 8 languages, Nurse Calder used to be in the SEALs, Nurse Calder is secretly a spy. The truth, as it turned out, needed no exaggeration. During the follow-up meeting, the recovered minister specifically requested that the young woman who saved my life and spoke to me like a countryman be present, and specifically credited to command. When Calder walked into the conference room this time, every head turned, and this time no one was laughing. The minister stood against diplomatic protocol, and clasped both of her hands in his, speaking warmly in his native dialect, calling her sister, thanking her not just for the translation but for the calm competence that had kept his family from losing him. Bregman watched from the head of the table, his earlier mockery now a stone in his stomach, as a senior naval attaché leaned over and quietly informed him that Lieutenant Commander Calder had, in fact, served 3 tours with a Special Operations Medical Detachment, had been decorated for actions during an extraction under fire that remained classified, and had specifically requested reassignment to hospital duty after her 3rd deployment, not because she couldn't handle combat, but because she decided she wanted to spend the rest of her career saving lives without a body count on either side. The attaché added, almost as an afterthought, that Calder held a silver star that had never been publicly announced at her own request. Bregman rose from his chair as the meeting concluded, intercepting Calder near the door before she could slip away as she always did. His jaw worked for a moment before words came out, And when they did, they were nothing like the sneer from days before. "I owe you an apology, Lieutenant Commander," he said, using her actual rank for the first time. "I judged you as nothing more than hospital staff. I was wrong and I was cruel about it." Calder studied him for a long moment, the same calm, unreadable expression she wore when treating patients or defusing hostile situations halfway across the world. "You judged what you could see, Admiral," she said finally. "Most people do. I'd just ask that next time, you extend the courtesy of finding out what you can't see before you decide someone doesn't matter." She turned and walked back toward the medical ward, back to the quiet, ordinary work she'd chosen for herself, leaving behind a room full of officers who would never again mistake silence for weakness, or a lowered rank for a lowered worth. If a story like this, quiet strength hiding in plain sight, finally seen for what it truly is, moved you even a little, don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel right now, because every single episode uncovers another hidden hero the world almost overlooked, and you will not want to miss what comes next.